of the disappearance of one former Prime Minister Harold Holt. Let me see now, he is in office from, I think it's 1966 to 1967. I think that's when he goes missing, and then there's a coronial inquest. They try and figure out what the heck happened to him. There are lots of theories, rather eccentric ones, going around. One was that he disappeared at a beach, he drowned. Another one was, let me see, that he, not only did he disappear at a beach, he was kidnapped by a Chinese submarine and off he went to Beijing, where he lived happily ever after, got to feed the pigeons in the park, the whole bit, you know. Another one was, none of that happened. What happened was he left of his own accord, went to Austria, lives in a lovely cottage in Bavaria. Minister Hitler, he just lives down the road, that sort of stuff. And that one that never really comes up is that he may have been ritually murdered by indigenous peoples. In our region, cannibalism was not unusual, and tribal wars were not that unusual. And in a climate where people had lost their moral compass from substance abuse, it was entirely possible that Harold Holt was murdered by indigenous peoples who'd gone off the rails or something, and they tried to do some sort of Black Panther resistance or something and kill him as some sort of way of acting as leverage for the extortion of people. It's a horrible thought, isn't it? But it's one that I think people think about, given the manner of expression. Some people, it's the way some people behave these days, yeah. The thing that I found interesting about that particular view was that there have been people in the area of historiography who just won't broach the issue. For example, one quite prominent celebrity historian, Professor Marcia Langdon, never really approached the idea, did she? You look at, I think, Senator Dodson, he doesn't really talk about these things. And there are, you know, indeed some prominent white historians who just didn't talk about it either. I was looking through the newsreel footage of the funeral of Harold Holt, and I was surprised to see some of those quite well-known nation-state leaders there at the time. One was, of course, Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Singapore. Right up until the 1990s, he entered the office of Prime Minister sometime after the Second World War and continued to preside and manage the public policy of Singapore. Some would say a lot of the region as well, along with President Mahathir. And he was very young there, and of course what made me think of him was my uncle was on the last boat out of Singapore when the Japanese invaded and annexed the island. I was trying to work out whether they had a causeway in Singapore back in those days. They must have, otherwise they couldn't have gotten across with the artillery and the tanks or whatever they had, the troop carriers, whatever they used. Yeah, so he left the island of Singapore on the last boat, and I think that was the boat where, you know, where General MacArthur, he turns around and says, "I shall return." You know, that's famous saying. That's with Singapore, isn't it? He says that, and then he goes back to Australia. And if you look in Brisbane, in the CBD, you'll see a building, it's called MacArthur Chambers. And that was where he did his planning to do a counter-attack against the Japanese in Singapore and outflank them to rewin the island. Very important part of history, isn't it? And although I wasn't there, I'm related to the people who had quite a critical role, so to speak, in the matter. Yeah. My uncle, he came back from Singapore, and he was as skinny as a rake. That's what my mother said. That's what she noticed about him. He was very skinny. He went on to live his life with his family, and lived happily ever after. There you go. So there are happily ever after stories in that particular story. There were other people too there. There was a young king, now King of England, yeah? The present King of England was there as a young man, in fact a teenager I think it was, yeah? Certainly early 20s. Who else was there in the newsreel footage? Other leaders including representatives from the embassies and American state officials. There were quite a few people there. And as I say, nobody really broached the issue of former Prime Minister Holt being murdered by some sort of ritual murder of ambush by Indigenous peoples. But it's almost certainly something that crossed my mind over time, that these things are something that can happen. And I guess a lot of people wonder, what the heck would you want to do that? If you did in fact do that, if you wanted to threaten people, to murder them or something, or have them murdered, or have them die in this adventure, what exactly would you want? Okay? Because that's what a lot of people wonder. And when you look at that funeral footage, if indeed you do, you'll see that there is a deep sense of melancholy and glumness on the face of people, an intolerable sense of horribleness at something that had happened. Because I think you'll see that they actually knew what happened that day. Certainly former Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew knew what happened, as did President Mahathir. So anyway, thanks very much for listening, and of course for the people of Indonesia and Malaysia. Terima kasih banyak atas semua bantuan dan informasi yang Bapak berikan. Semoga pengajaran ini bertambah maju. See you later, everybody. Bye.